There is a specific frequency of silence that never sits right with a man who has spent half his life looking through a scope. Over in Helmand Province, we called it the breath before the break, that heavy, suffocating stillness right before the mortar shells started whistling in. I never expected to hear that same dangerous quiet in a suburb in Georgia, but the first week my wife Sarah and I moved into Willow Creek Estates, the air felt heavy, like it was waiting for permission to move. I was 52, fresh off a 20-year career in Delta Force, carrying a master sergeant's pension and a collection of memories that didn't like to sleep when I did. Sarah, God bless her, had spent decades chasing leads as an investigative journalist for the Houston Chronicle, living off deadline adrenaline and cold coffee, and she wanted out. She wanted the cliché, white picket fences, manicured lawns, and a man-made lake where the biggest drama was the ducks fighting over bread crusts. Willow Creek Estates promised us paradise, a sanctuary for the serene, according to the glossy brochure. But looking back, I should have known that paradise usually has a snake, or in this case, a man in a polyester polo shirt. The first week was a blur of unpacking boxes and trying to deprogram my brain from combat mode. I'd be mowing the lawn, scanning the tree line for snipers out of habit, only to realize it was just Mrs. Gable from across the street bringing us a zucchini loaf and a 3-inch binder of HOA regulations. I smiled, took the bread, and tossed the binder on the counter, thinking it was just bureaucratic fluff. I was wrong. The first battle of my retirement wasn't going to be fought over territory or oil, but over a flag that meant more to me than this entire subdivision combined. See, to most people, a flag is just colored cloth, something you pick up at a hardware store for the 4th of July. But the flag hanging on my front porch was different. It wasn't bought, it was bled for. Sarah had stitched it herself during those long, sleepless nights when I was deployed on my final tour. She took my old combat fatigues, the ones stained with the red dust of Fallujah and the sweat of 1,000 patrols, and she cut them into strips. She sewed them together, replacing the red and white stripes with the olive drab and desert tan of my service, and right there on the bottom hem, she embroidered a single black line with a date, August 12, 2011. That was the day Specialist David D.J. Jacobs died. He was a 22-year-old kid from Ohio who took a burst of AK-47 fire that was meant for me. He saved my life, and the only thing I could give him back was a memory. So, underneath that custom flag, I mounted a bronze plaque on the porch column that read, "In memory of Specialist D.J. Jacobs, 75th Ranger Regiment." All gave some gave all. It was my shrine, my way of saying goodnight to the kid every evening. I didn't think a memorial would trigger a war, but then came the knock. It was Sunday morning, barely 8 a.m. It wasn't a friendly neighbor knock. It was a rhythmic, authoritative pounding, 3 hard strikes like a gavel. I opened the door with my coffee mug in hand, the steam curling into the humid air. Standing there were 3 men wearing matching tactical vests that looked like they'd been ordered from a discount surplus catalog. The guy in the middle, the ringleader, was a piece of work. He stood 6'2", mirrored sunglasses, jaw set like he was posing for a movie poster he wasn't in. This was Roger Vance, the self-appointed head of Vanguard Patrol, the private security firm hired by the HOA. "Can I help you?" I asked, keeping my voice low, the way you speak to a spooked horse. Roger didn't smile. He adjusted his belt, which was weighed down with a flashlight, handcuffs, and a canister of pepper spray that looked comically large. "Mr. McAllister," he said, his voice dripping with forced authority. "We have a violation code 404 regarding unauthorized signage and non-conforming flag displays. That banner and that brass plate need to come down immediately." I took a slow sip of coffee, letting the silence stretch just long enough to make his guys shift their weight. "That banner," I said, pointing a thumb over my shoulder, "is a memorial made from a U.S. Army uniform, and the plaque honors a soldier who died saving my life." "They stay," Roger smirked, a nasty little twitch of the lip. "This isn't Texas, old-timer. We have standards in Willow Creek. Uniformity is value. Personal shrines lower property value. You have 24 hours to remove them, or Vanguard Patrol will remove them for you." I looked him dead in the eyes, lowering my sunglasses. "Remove them for me?" I repeated, letting a little bit of the Delta operator slip into my tone. Cold, flat, and absolute. "Son, that would be a mistake." He leaned in, trying to dominate my space. Is that a threat? It's an education, I said. Walk away, Roger. They left, boots crunching on my driveway, muttering threats into their radios like they were calling in an airstrike instead of walking back to a Ford Explorer. I watched them go, feeling that old, familiar coil tightening in my gut. The piece was over. That afternoon, Sarah went into full investigative mode. She wasn't just a gardener anymore. She was the woman who helped bring down a corruption ring in Houston. She sat at the dining table, surrounded by laptops and legal pads. You know who this Roger Vance is? She asked, spinning the screen around. He's a washout. Failed the police academy entrance exam twice in Florida. Got fired from a mall security gig for excessive force. Now he runs this Vanguard patrol like it's his personal militia. And get this, the HOA board is paying them double the market rate. Someone is getting kickbacks. So he's a bully with a budget, I said, staring out the window at the darkening street. He's dangerous, Sarah corrected, taking off her reading glasses. Because he thinks he has the law on his side. He's going to come back, Mac. She was right. The psychological warfare started that night. A black SUV with tinted windows began circling the cul-de-sac. It would slow down in front of our house, high beams flooding the living room, then peel off just as I got to the window. It was classic intimidation. Make the target feel watched. Make them feel unsafe in their own sanctuary. But they forgot one thing. I had spent 20 years hunting men who were actual nightmares. Roger Vance was just a bad dream. The escalation didn't take weeks. It took days. By Tuesday, things had shifted from bureaucratic annoyance to active hostility. I came home from a run to find my mailbox smashed open, the door hanging by a single hinge. Inside, there was no mail, just a printed note on plain white paper. Compliance is mandatory. No signature, just the cowardice of anonymity. I didn't call the police. In my experience, especially in small towns like the one outside Willow Creek, filing a report against the HOA's security team just gets lost in paperwork. Besides, when seconds count, the police are minutes away. I needed to know the terrain, so I started taking evening walks, mapping the neighborhood, watching the patterns. That's when I met Artie Higgins. He was sitting on his porch 3 houses down, whittling a piece of cedar, a cane resting against his knee. Artie was 70-something, a Vietnam vet who had left a piece of his soul in the Mekong Delta. We'd exchanged nods before, the silent language of men who have seen the elephant. But tonight he spoke up. You're the one poking the bear, Artie said without looking up from his knife work. The bear poked me first, I replied, stopping at the edge of his lawn. Artie chuckled, a dry, raspy sound. That Roger fella. He's been strutting around here like he owns the pavement. Tried to find me for my trash can being 3 inches too far to the left last month. I told him where he could stick his ruler. He looked up then, eyes sharp and clear. I've been watching that SUV circle your place. You need eyes on your 6. I might, I admitted. Looks like they're planning a midnight visit. I sleep light, Artie said. And I still shoot straight. It was good to know I wasn't alone, but I hoped it wouldn't come to that. The climax arrived on a Friday, amidst a torrential Georgia downpour. It was 3 a.m. The rain was hammering the roof so hard it sounded like static, masking the sound of footsteps. But Sarah had installed a perimeter alarm on the driveway, a silent notification that buzzed my phone on the nightstand. I woke up instantly. No grogginess, just that switch flipping from off to lethal. I checked the camera feed on my phone. 3 figures in rain ponchos were creeping up the driveway. One of them was carrying a hacksaw. They weren't there to leave a note this time. They were coming for the flag. They were coming to cut down DJ's memorial. Stay here, I whispered to Sarah, who was already reaching for her phone to record. Lock the bedroom door. Mac, be careful, she hissed. I'm not the one in danger, I said, slipping into my boots. I didn't grab a gun. I didn't need one for this trash. I grabbed a tactical flashlight and stepped into the hallway, moving silently through the house I had memorized in the dark. I watched them through the peephole. They were on the porch now. Roger was whispering orders, pointing at the bronze plaque. The guy with the hacksaw stepped forward, raising the blade to the wood of my porch column. That was the line. I ripped the front door open. The sound of the door opening was lost in the thunder, but the sudden flood of light from the foyer froze them like deer. Drop it, I roared, my voice cutting through the storm. There were 3 of them. Roger, the hacksaw guy, and a third brute who looked like he spent his life lifting heavy things but never learned how to fight. They were wet, startled, and arrogant. "This is HOA property enforcement," Roger shouted, trying to recover his swagger, reaching for that oversized canister of pepper spray. "You're in violation. You're trespassing," I said, stepping barefoot onto the wet concrete of the porch. The cold rain soaked my t-shirt instantly. "Last chance. Walk away." The hacksaw guy made the mistake. He lunged, swinging the saw like a clumsy club. What happened next took exactly 60 seconds, but in my mind, it slowed down to a series of technical equations. Leverage, momentum, gravity. He swung high. I stepped inside his guard, catching his wrist with my left hand and driving my right forearm into his solar plexus. The air left his lungs with a wet wheeze. As he doubled over, I stripped the saw from his hand and tossed it into the bushes. One down. The big guy charged me, trying to tackle me like a linebacker. I didn't fight his weight. I used it. I pivoted on my heel, grabbed his wet poncho, and executed a drop sennage, a shoulder throw. He went airborne, flipping over my back and slamming onto the porch decking with a bone-rattling thud. The wind was knocked out of him before he even realized he was flying. That left Roger. He had the pepper spray out now, fumbling with the safety tab, his hands shaking. He wasn't a warrior. He was a bully who had never been punched in the mouth. "Don't," I said, walking toward him. He sprayed. A cloud of orange mist erupted, but the wind whipped it right back into his own face. He screamed, clawing at his eyes, blinding himself. I closed the distance, kicked his legs out from under him, and pinned him face down on the welcome mat, twisting his arm behind his back just until he stopped squirming. "Sarah," I called out, not even winded. "Call the cops." I looked down at Roger, who was sobbing into the concrete, snot and pepper spray mixing on his face. "You wanted to play soldier, Roger?" I whispered into his ear. "Soldiers know when they're beaten. You're just a trespasser with a toy badge." The whole fight, start to finish, had taken less time than it takes to brew a cup of coffee. The silence returned, heavier now, punctuated only by the groans of the men writhing on my porch. The red and blue lights of the police cruisers cut through the rain like strobe lights at a bad disco. Roger and his goons were still on the ground. I hadn't let them up. When the first officer, a grizzled sergeant named Miller, walked up the steps, his hand was resting on his holster, cautious. But then he saw me, hands raised, calm, and he saw the three men in tactical cosplay groaning at my feet. "Care to explain, sir?" Miller asked, eyeing the discarded hacksaw in the bushes. "They came to vandalize a military memorial," I said, gesturing to the flag which was miraculously untouched. "I performed a citizen's arrest for trespassing and attempted destruction of property. My wife has the video." Sarah stepped out, phone in hand, and showed Miller the footage. You could see the officer's jaw tighten as he watched Roger give the order to cut the plaque. Miller, it turned out, was a Marine. He looked at the flag, then at the plaque for DJ Jacobs, and finally at Roger, who was being handcuffed by a rookie cop. "You tried to desecrate a fallen soldier's memorial?" Miller asked Roger, his voice dangerously low. "On my watch. I am the head of security for Willow Creek." Roger sputtered, his eyes swollen shut. "I have authority." "You have the right to remain silent," Miller said, shoving him into the back of the cruiser. "And I suggest you use it." But the real justice didn't happen in the back of a cop car. It happened online. Sarah uploaded the footage, not just the fight, but the backstory, the harassment, the circular driving, the smashed mailbox. By morning, the video had exploded. It wasn't just a neighborhood dispute anymore. It was a national conversation about petty tyrants and the respect owed to veterans. The Willow Creek HOA board called an emergency meeting 3 days later at the community center to address the incident. They expected to sweep it under the rug. Instead, they walked into an ambush. The hall was packed. Standing room only. Artie Higgins was there in the front row, leaning on his cane. Mrs. Gable was there. People I had never met were there. When the board president, a nervous woman named Linda, tried to bang her gavel to start the meeting, nobody sat down. Sarah stood up. She didn't shout. She just read the state statutes regarding the protection of military displays. Then she read the financial records she had dug up, exposing how the board was getting kickbacks from Vanguard Patrol. The room erupted. The entire board resigned that night, terrified of the lawsuits Sarah threatened to unleash. A week later, life had settled into a new kind of rhythm. The black SUV was gone. The Vanguard patrols were canceled. I was sitting on the porch, sanding down a new rocking chair I was building, when Artie walked up the driveway with a six-pack of beer. Heard Roger made bail, Artie said, handing me a cold one. But he's moving back to Florida. Can't show his face at the grocery store without someone asking if he needs a hacksaw. I cracked the beer and toasted the bronze plaque on the column. Good riddance. We sat there for a while, watching the sun go down over the lake. The silence was back, but it wasn't the heavy, suffocating silence of that first week. It was a real peace. The kind you earn. You know, I said, looking at the flag gently waving in the breeze. I came here thinking I left the fight overseas. Thinking peace was just a place you moved to. And now? Artie asked. Now I know peace isn't a location, I said. It's something you have to defend. Sometimes with a rifle, sometimes with a hacksaw, and sometimes just by standing on your damn porch and saying no. I looked at the date on the flag, August 12, 2011. DJ would have laughed his ass off seeing me throw a mall cop over my shoulder. He would have loved this view. But here's the question that keeps me up at night, and I want to hear what you guys think in the comments. At what point does a community rule become oppression? We sign these HOA contracts thinking we're buying safety, but are we just signing away our freedom to a bunch of failed hall monitors? And more importantly, if someone came for something sacred on your front porch in the middle of the night, would you have waited for the police, or would you have ended it in 60 seconds like I did? Let me know. And Roger, if you're watching this, stay out of Georgia.